Hi, everyone. So I think as people are filing in, we'll just start with some of the administrative pieces. So I'd like to welcome you to the session. My name is Nicole Fisher. I'm head of sustainability for Kraft Heinz Canada and also co-chair of the CPP Advisory Council. So very excited to be here to moderate this wonderful session for you guys. It's curated with jam-packed speakers, great content. It'll be engaging, exciting, and we look forward to your active participation. So I'd like to begin with the land acknowledgement. So acknowledging the Indigenous people of all the lands that we are on today. While we meet today virtually, I'd like to acknowledge the importance of the lands that we each call home. We do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility in improving relationships between nations and to improving our own understanding of local Indigenous peoples and their cultures. From coast to coast to coast, we acknowledge ancestral and unceded territory of all the Inuit, Métis, and First Nation people that call this land home. Please join me in a moment of reflection to acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past and to consider how we can each try to move forward in a spirit of reconciliation. Great, thank you everyone. So the goal of today's session is to really begin a conversation on the implementation of the Golden Design Rules. The Golden Design Rules are a set of packaging design guidelines developed collaboratively through the Consumer Goods Forum with a number of leading industry experts across the value chain. They provide a clear framework for plastic packaging design that will result in less packaging waste and mark an exciting milestone for us in Canada and North America as we move towards a circular plastics economy. The CPP is extremely proud to be leading in the consultation and implementation of the Golden Design Rules within the Canadian marketplace, and we're very excited to start the conversation today here with you. As we said, we have a number of guests who have joined us and graciously agreed to lend their time and their expertise. And so we're going to start with some introductory remarks from Ashley C. Hall, who's the Director of Sustainability for Walmart. And then we're going to talk to Ben Dixon at Systemics IQ, who's going to give us an overview of the Golden Design Rules. Then some key considerations for Canadian implementation from George Roeder, who's Managing Director of the CPP. And then we're going to have an industry panel with a number of industry experts to give their perspectives on how to advance the GDRs. And that industry panel will include Vlad Rebellion from Loblaws, Johan Hartline from Nestle Global, and Aideen Quinn from EPS Plastics. So we're going to start, and as we wrap up, we're going to talk about some educational opportunities for the GDRs developed by PAC, the Packaging Association of Canada. So a lot of great content for you here today, and we're excited to get going. Some quick housekeeping items. So we know many of you are working across the board to advance sustainable packaging. We want this to be interactive, we want this to be engaging, and we want your thoughts and your input. So there'll be a lot of time for questions for our industry experts and our speakers. So please do use the Q&A function for questions and the chat box for comments and conversation. And thank you everyone for putting your names in the chat box already so we can get a sense of who's with us today and all get to know each other. The session is being recorded and the recording as well as the presentation materials will be available after the session. Just in terms of competition, all of our Canada Plastics Pact meetings are held within the context of existing competition laws outlined on the slide up now. So any discussion or exchange that may appear to, or that in fact may breach competition rules will be brought to an end immediately. These rules refer generally to the exchange of competitively sensitive information. So we're going to start by moving to Ashley C. Hall, so Director of Sustainable Packaging with Walmart, who's going to provide us some opening reflections from the Consumer Good Forum and the development of the Golden Design Rules. And you can see her bio, which will be posted in the chat, so you can read more about her. And now over to you, Ashley.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. So I go by Ashley C. Hall because there are many Ashley Halls that work for Walmart. So if you want to reach me, please remember the C. I lead our global plastics and packaging initiatives for Walmart and have been with the company for about 7 years now. This is such an important topic, especially for producers, manufacturers, and retailers when it comes to plastic packaging, because we really control the design. It's one of the elements that we have the most opportunity to have impact on. We can't necessarily know if a customer will or will not recycle an item, if a community will or will not have the latest equipment to sort and recycle an item, but we can control how that package is designed and how it is shipped and how it is sold. And that's a really exciting opportunity for us. For Walmart, we've been on this journey in terms of design for a number of years. And personally, I've been involved in design around plastics and packaging for well over a decade. In fact, I met my husband, who's Canadian, talking about label and adhesive issues around plastic packaging. And that was over 10 years ago, and we are still talking about the same issues today. And so it is my hope that as we talk about these CGF Golden Design Rules, we will really raise the flag to say these are the most important topics for discussion. These are the elements of design out of all of the elements that really, if you're going to focus on something, these are the ones to focus on. And they're intended to help reduce unnecessary plastic packaging, to improve the circularity of plastics. Plastics are a great material, and we want them, especially in recycled content. But if we're using things like black plastic or materials that are known contaminants to the recycling stream, that causes challenges. And so that's what these design rules really get to address. And what I'm thrilled about is to see that the Canadian Plastics Pact is talking about this, because it will allow you to move with speed. All of the pacts have really ambitious timelines to make massive change in just a handful of years. And while a lot of time and effort can be spent in rediscussing what should or shouldn't be included in terms of what can and can't be recycled and all of the nuanced details, I think leveraging existing work that's done by a multi-stakeholder group like the Consumer Goods Forum that looks at it from a global and at more of a regional and national level really makes sense. And so with that, I'm thrilled to turn it over to, I think Ben is the next one speaking. And I'd say if you all have any additional questions from a Walmart perspective, please don't hesitate to put them in the chat, and I'm happy to try to answer them as we go. Thanks.
Right, thank you very much, Ashley. This is Ben Dixon speaking, and thank you so much for having me. So I'm a partner in a company called Systemic. Systemic has been working together with the Consumer Goods Forum on the Plastic Waste Coalition of Action for the last 2 years. I've also had the great pleasure of working closely with Ashley, who's played a really significant role in helping to develop the golden rules that I'm going to talk about today, along with many of her colleagues from other organizations that are part of the coalition. It's a great privilege to be here. It's wonderful to see so many people on the call. And the reason it's a great privilege, particularly, I'm a huge admirer of what's happening in Canada. Of the Plastics Pact is gathering such fantastic momentum. And I would say that this is really a great opportunity, not just to speak to Canada, but also what we're seeing is that Canada and the Plastic Pact is becoming an example for others. So really, hopefully you feel pioneering, because many people around the world are looking at the progress that's being made and the great collaboration that's happening. So very excited to be here. I'll introduce myself with a photo, if that's all right, before I talk about the design rules, because I think this also tells us a little bit about the challenge that we're facing on plastics. If you go to the next page, please. It's actually 3 photos. So the first photo on the left-hand side is my daughter and a week's worth of plastic packaging waste from my house. I think this is something I would encourage everybody to do if you haven't done it already, because it's an incredibly enlightening thing to do. What you realize when you keep your plastic waste for a week is what an extraordinary range of high-performing materials and products this industry has developed over the last decades, which do a fantastic job at what they're meant to do, keeping food fresh, helping to move products around the world. But when you look at them together, you realize what a huge challenge this is for the circular economy. and what a huge design challenge we have to maintain those great functional properties, but to build to get the design right so that these things can then also be reused or recycled at the end of their life. That was my first plastics project. I then moved to Indonesia in 2018 to set up something called Project Stop. And the middle picture, I think, tells us what we really have to think about with this issue, which is that this is not just an issue of the head and design, but also an issue that I think gets to our hearts and the hearts of the consumers, the general public, when they see pictures like this. So this is a picture from the west coast of Bali in Indonesia, where plastic waste washes in every winter and devastates this community, which relies on tourism and fishing for its livelihoods. This is, I think, an issue, a picture we're seeing too often, and I think really illustrates why this issue hits the attention of consumers and the public around the world. The third picture is a report that Systemic was involved in together with the Pew Charitable Trusts called Breaking the Plastic Wave. And I think this has helped to really frame this issue of plastics on the global scale, and both giving us the really challenging prediction that if we keep going in the way that we are going with plastic waste, we will triple the flow of plastics into nature by 2040, but also putting forward a solutions map and a roadmap for how we can move out of this issue, how we can get ourselves out of the mess that we've created on plastics. And at the heart of that solutions map is redesign. So redesign of products that contain plastics and redesign of the system. We go to the next page, please. All right, so where does the CGF fit in here? The CGF is a group of more than 400 brands and retailers that work together at CEO level on sustainability issues. They have a number of coalitions of action, and one of those is called the Plastic Waste Coalition of Action. As you can see here, we have 42 manufacturers and retailers who've come together in this coalition, and they have this mantra, which I think is useful to keep us thinking in a simple way about this complex challenge, which, as we move forward, the group talks a lot about less plastic, so reducing and substituting avoidable plastics. Better plastics, making sure plastics are recyclable, using recycled content, that's what we'll talk about today, and also better systems, so thinking about not just the products that we're putting into the system, but also about how the industry can support effective reuse and recycling systems. So that mantra helps to keep us simple. The coalition works on 3 specific topics. Design we'll talk about today. Extended producer responsibility is the second key work stream and focus area, and the third one is on advanced recycling technologies. But I'm here to talk about design, and particularly about the golden design rules. So we can go to the next page, please. The first thing I'll just mention is why. Why did we believe that golden design rules were needed and that this would be a good thing for the CGF coalition to work on? I think we've all heard the messages about design, and I think we're all starting to understand that the choices that are made about materials, about color, labels and adhesives, even the shape and the size of the packaging that goes into the market are a hugely significant determinant of, will that packaging be suitable for the circular economy? Will it be recycled and reused at the end of life? Or will it be rejected, ultimately ending up in a landfill or in an incinerator? Or will it, even worse, contaminate the recycling system and mean that even other packaging that is well designed can't be recycled? Now, you're also probably all aware that there's many commitments out there, including high-level commitments through the New Plastics Economy Global Commitment, for example, where many companies have committed to only use 100% reusable, recyclable or compostable packaging by 2025. And there's also very detailed technical eco-design guidelines, often country-specific or region-specific, sometimes running to hundreds of pages of technical information about how to think about eco-design when it comes to specific products and specific materials. Even though we have those things, we still see challenges. So I think we'll also see everyday packaging design choices which have no chance of being reused or recycled. We just have to walk into a supermarket to see excess packaging. Sometimes people talk about shipping air rather than shipping products. And we still see use of problematic plastics that then contaminate the system. And so the group that came together under the umbrella of the CGF decided that moving forward with some golden design rules was a great opportunity to accelerate and simplify the need here, which was for leading companies to jointly come together and voluntarily commit to specific packaging design changes. And that was the goal that was set at the beginning of this project. Next page, please. All right, so how do we do this? I think the first thing to say is that this has been a company-led process. And so I mentioned that Ashley was the chair of the work stream. We also have Jochen from Nestle coming up, who is a current chair of the work stream. And so what we've been able to do is bring those companies together with a sense of high ambition and high challenge to say, what can we do? What should we do together? What are those golden design rules that will be pushing us to make sure we're really pushing ourselves towards those global commitments that we've made, and things that we want to do together. So this whole set of design rules was developed together with all of these member companies, and also with strong reference back to those technical guidelines that I mentioned, and with a consultation process across the world. So what we were aiming for was globally relevant guidelines that, as I think George will talk about this, there may be some local kind of interpretation that's needed, but the idea here is that we're looking for those simple golden rules that would apply all around the world. And in order to do that, we talked to a number of different global agencies, including Crow's Nest Environmental. Some of you will know Dan from Crow's Nest, who gave us a very helpful Canadian perspective on this challenge. Next page, please. So that was the how do we do this? And then, of course, the question you're all asking is, so what do they say? What are these golden rules? The golden rules are grouped around 5 different objectives, and they reflect the fact that this is quite a complex system we're dealing with. Some of these materials, like PET bottles, have a well-established and mature recycling system already. Some materials, like PET thermoform trays or many types of flexible packaging, don't have a mature system. And so for those materials, it's actually much harder to write the rules because you're designing for a future system. So this framework helped us to think about, what are we designing for? And as you can see, there are 5 guiding objectives. The first one is about eliminating the nasties, eliminating the problematic and the unnecessary materials and packaging. The second one is about those materials with a system. How do we enhance the value of those materials and make sure that they actually do end up in the recycling system? The third one is about anticipating and planning for future recycling for those things that I mentioned. The fourth area is around business to business packaging. And I think that's a very interesting topic where there's been, I think, an acceptance that more can be done on business to business packaging, and a very interesting area to work on. And last of all, communicating with our consumers through on-pack recycling instructions. So the next page has some of our kind of infographics to give the very simple view of what do these golden design rules say. I'll just pick out a couple of these to explain and maybe give a bit of a flavor of what they mean without going through everything. I would say that for this group, there's a whole lot of backup information behind each of these rules, both to explain why it is that the rule is set up the way that it is, and also to give more guidance on how to interpret these. Because as you all know, I think, packaging design is a real science here, and so there's a lot of detail behind these as well, so to guide people in how to interpret. So just to give a couple of examples of what does it say in the golden rules, I'm going to pick out number 2, which I think is a crucial area, because what I mentioned here is that if we're using the wrong materials, it doesn't just end up in landfills or incinerators, but also risks contaminating the whole system. And so an example in here is that the companies that have signed up to these golden rules have committed to eliminate PVC and PVDC from packaging. because those are materials that are contaminants. They're also materials that can cause health effects if they're burned in an uncontrolled environment. Carbon black is another good example. So we talk about undetectable carbon black. And the problem with that is packaging that has undetectable carbon black will never be sorted by one of these automatic sorting machines. So it's destined to end up in a landfill or an incineration facility. And so there's a couple of examples of problematic elements here. I'm happy to pick up any of the other ones in the questions. And then the other one that I'll pick up here, just to give a bit more of the nuance here, is number 6, which talks about increasing recycling value in flexible packaging. And so, as we know, in many places, the system hasn't yet evolved to recycle post-consumer flexible packaging. And so what the rule does is it follows the guidance that comes from a group called CFlex, which is another global collaboration, and it emphasizes the benefits of designing through mono plastics. So rather than combining many different layers and types of plastics, which is a nightmare for recycling, it says we should be looking for either 90% or more monopolyethylene, or 90% or more monopolypropylene, or if necessary, a combination of PE and PP, which can actually be recycled together, but getting away from many other types of materials that cause problems for recycling. Rather than go through all these rules, I think I'll just leave it there, and I would very much welcome any questions from people who've got would like to hear more about the other rules. I think just to give the final comment here, which is to let you know what uptake we're getting on these rules. What you'll see is from the pioneer group of companies that got together to develop these. Each of these rules, we have more than 20 of those companies have signed up to say, we will implement this rule in full across our portfolio by 2025. And these are some of the largest brands and retailers in the world who've stepped up to say that. We're also starting to see now that this discussion is moving down to the country level. So this is a very exciting discussion. As I said, we're also talking to Japan, to China, and to other places. And you see how this is now really galvanizing people to say, thank goodness now we can have some really kind of practical discussions about design. So we're really feeling a lot of demand now and some great uptake in the market. I'm going to leave it there and thank everybody for listening, and I will very happily answer questions later.
Thank you so much, Ben. Really appreciate you taking us through the Golden Design Rules, how they were developed, and the content of the rules, which we can all start to think about how we'll execute within our organizations. So I'd just like to encourage everyone, to please put your questions in the Q&A section. So I see we have one, which we will get to in a moment. But first, I just wanted to pass it on to George Roeder, Managing Director of the CPP, to talk a bit about the role of the CPP in bringing the Golden Design Rules to Canada. George?
Great, thanks so much, Nicole. And for those of you who don't or are newer to the Canada Plastics Pact, let me just introduce this pact very briefly. We've started since around January of this past year as really Canada's leading coalition of businesses and organizations and NGOs and associations and governments that are coming together to tackle the challenge of plastic waste. And we've made our work really focused on this broad vision of a circular economy for plastics packaging. If you go to the next slide, that vision is really encompassed by this work that the Ellen MacArthur Foundation did on articulating these 3 elements that need to be present in a circular economy for plastics packaging. So the first is being able to eliminate the plastics, and in particular, the plastics packaging we don't need, ensuring that we're constantly innovating to make sure that the plastics we are using that are, as Ben articulated, are so crucial and useful that they continue to recirculate and are recyclable, reusable, recyclable, or compostable, and then finally that they continue to circulate in the economy. And so when we looked at the Golden Design Rules and looked at the agenda of action for the Canada Plastics Pact, what we really saw was there was a great match between this vision and those Golden Design Rules and that shared agenda that we're aiming to drive forward. And so if you go to the next slide, please, the what we've decided to do with the Canada Plastics Pact is, as Ben has suggested, we've really decided that we are going to champion these rules within this Canadian context, which means a few things that I'll talk briefly about right now. But just go back to sort of the objective here, and I think Ashley framed it really well, and Ben framed it really well. For the CPP and for Canada, what we're really thinking about it in the context of is improving the inputs to the recycling system. And as Ashley said, really kind of moving with speed. So we're not so much kind of rebuilding all of this work to agree on a smaller set of rules, but instead getting to the point quickly where there's clear guidance for companies, for brands, a clear roadmap on the things that they control, and delivering a clear signal to the broader packaging, to the broader Canadian market on where packaging design is heading. So that's really our intentions from the Canada Plastics Pact. And then second is what we do and what we're going to be doing to really put kind of rubber to the road against that is have these 3 points as our areas of action. So first of all, and I'll talk about this in a moment, building some guidance, a guidance layer for Canada and the Canadian context onto the Golden Design Rules, and doing that in a very consultative way. Second is really working with partners, and again, we'll hear about this a little bit later from the packaging consortium, is working with partners to deploy educational and consulting programs for brands and for vendors so that there's uptake. So it's not just publishing these and hoping, but instead really realizing that there's a ton of work that needs to go on, and there's an opportunity for us to help support that work. And then finally, not making this just about the Canada Plastics Pact or those who are participating in the CGF, but really making this about the entire Canadian market and finding the ways to build outreach and allow for other organizations to either commit or report or engage with these Golden Design Rules. If you go to the next slide. So I want to talk a little bit about the Canadian guidance just for a moment. And I'll go fairly quickly here to just give a flavor of what this is, because it'll be a bit of a sneak preview of what's coming out in the next couple of weeks. So really what we sat back and we asked, okay, when we talk about Canadian guidance and really bringing these into the Canadian market, what are the considerations that we need to have in mind? And the first was really identifying what possible exceptions there might be to a Golden Design Rule, where either the existing GDR isn't solving a problem in Canada because that problem doesn't exist in Canada, or whether the existing GDR will cause a problem in Canada because of the particular context. And so that was really the first kind of dimension of Canadian guidance. And then the second was clarifying these for the Canadian context, especially where there's regional design guidelines. All making sure that we're adhering to these broad principles, and for the most part, trying not to touch them as much as possible so that it really continues aligning with this global set of guidance that there's broad consensus on. So if you go to the next slide, please. So one of the things that we did was we brought partners within the CPP and other experts around these Golden Design Rules to ask the question, really, is there Canadian guidance that is needed? And to take a quick example for Golden Design Rule number 6, which Ben already talked about increasing the value in flexible consumer packaging. Let me give an example of what this Canadian guidance is ultimately going to look like. So this really refers to two pieces. One is meet regional design guidelines where they exist. And second is for packaging that is not currently accepted, but where there's a clear pathway to a recycling system by 2025, here are these elements. And we have guidance on both of those. So if you go to the next slide, the guidance really articulates kind of two things. One is in Canada, really it's only non-laminated bags and films that exceed 50% access to recycling in Canada. And so those are really the preferred film or the film and flexible packaging as really very much described in these rules. So it's just kind of clarifying that this is the current state. And then really the second part of the Canadian guidance is saying, while there's a ton of work on polypropylene and mixed polyolefins in other countries, in Canada, actually, the current state is not that. And there's a strong preference towards polyethylene and going for, a mono polyethylene film that is preferably over 90% mono or over 90% or minimum over 90%. And that's based on really what we're seeing in this market. So it's a little bit more stringent. The Canadian guidance is a little bit more stringent than that global guidance, sort of saying, okay, in the Canadian market, here's what we see that really can be processed. And so as a Canadian firm bringing packaging into Canada, here's how you should interpret this rule. So that's an example, and we've basically done a very similar thing for every single one of the golden design rules. We're working right now on finalizing a bunch of that language, getting a few more comments on that, and then going to be putting it out into the Canadian market. And just for a final slide, I guess my final message here is we're quite committed to championing these golden design rules from the Canada Plastics Pact, but it needs to be, we know that this needs to be much broader than the Canada Plastics Pact and really engage a broad set of actors in the Canadian market. And to do that, we're really committed to putting out a program and this Canadian guidance document in the next few weeks, which will be much clearer. And this webinar today is very much the kickoff to that. So thanks for that, and I'll pass it back over to you, Nicole.
Thank you so much, George. Really appreciate you putting into the Canadian context for everyone. We have some great questions that have come in through the Q&A, so we're going to start, Ben. You ready? So first one is around why was there not an objective to reduce virgin plastic overall, not just B2B, and move towards eliminating single-use packaging as much as possible first?
This is a great question. Thank you, whoever wrote this one in. I think this illustrates what we were trying to do with the rules. So that many companies have decided that they will set themselves virgin reduction targets. Some companies have decided to set themselves absolute plastic reduction targets. That, I think, is a exciting trend, and I think it's something that really demonstrates commitment that companies are making on this issue. That wasn't the goal of what we were trying to do. What we were trying to do was to cut through some of the noise around design and put something very actionable into the market. So what we felt was that discussion around virgin reduction was moving pretty well. But this particular piece around, well, if we are going to use plastics, how should we do that? That felt like the really critical contribution that this group could make. So not to say that those targets are not important, but we just felt this was a particular contribution that was so critically needed at this point. Thanks for the question.
Excellent. There are a few questions, Ben, on sort of, I think, operationalizing some of the rules. So there's questions around what would be considered label friendly, where can I get those details? Are there other things that are considered things that you should avoid, like is EVOH a problem? So I think people are sort of going the next level down in terms of, okay, how can I execute this in my organization? Where do I get more details? If you could speak to that, that'd be great.
Yeah, maybe I'll, George, I don't know if you'd be interested to take that one, because I think
George, yes.
Yeah, I mean, because it's very, I think what George is doing here is exactly what I think we hoped would happen, is that, plastic packs and other key actors would be interpreting these rules. So maybe, George, do you want to pick that one up and answer the question?
Yeah, great. The very brief answer is that there is detailed guidance actually behind these golden design rules. Many of them link out to existing design guidance that's out there and the detailed specifics of that. So for example, the APR design guides. What we're going to be doing, and we're looking sort of early October, is publishing the Canadian guidance along with the detailed guidance behind the golden design rules on the Canada Plastics Pact website as a tool and a resource for any brands that want to start to work on these and align their design efforts and their design program around the Golden Design Rules.
Great, thank you so much, George. And I think this next one might also be for you potentially, or a combo. There are some questions around, I guess, again, sort of Canada specific items, things like EPS and PS being sort of a big industry in Canada, and what the perspective is there in terms of a roadmap for those industries to find solutions. There was a question around, as a recycler of PET containers and thermoforms, having closure selection added to GDR number 1, similar to GDR number 7. So I think there are a few other elements of Canada specific items. So I don't know, George, if you want to speak to just a little bit on maybe those two things and how they might be incorporated in the Canadianization of the rules.
Yeah, let me speak to both of those briefly. So there has been a lot of really robust and great conversation around EPS and PS in the Canadian guidance conversations, and in particular the level of investment in Ontario and in Quebec on figuring out how to both collect this, and I would say BC as well, and how to collect this material and to recycle it. And so this is a great example where the Canadian guidance basically says, while the recovery rate isn't at the place that it needs to be able to say, listen, this material is great, we also recognize that there's lots of progress in this. And we see that in Canada, it may actually be an exception to this rule. And we want to see how this really progresses between now and the end of 2022 to be able to provide sharper guidance to Canadian companies on this particular Golden Design Rule. So it's a really good example where I think the context in Canada is different than in some other places. And where the economics and technology has progressed. So you can look forward to that. And there's been some great, robust discussion. And then just on the Crystal's question on the closure selection, yeah, that's another great example of where that's being added as a clarification point to the Canadian guidance on Golden Design Rule number 1. So thanks for that.
Can I add one thing, George? I think also from the global perspective, these rules are not set in concrete forevermore. And we recognize there's a lot of dynamism in this system, and there's a lot of innovation happening, both on materials, but also on system innovations and recycling. So there's a process here where these rules get reviewed every year. Companies also can apply for exceptions where they believe that there's a good reason why things are changing, and those get reviewed by an expert panel. So don't want to give the impression this is the way it's going to be forevermore. I think this is really also about creating space for innovation and recognizing that the system's going to change. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Ben. That was great. So thank you everyone for your great questions. Keep them coming in. I think we're going to have time for probably 1 or 2 more now, and then we'll have more opportunity to address them later in the session as well. But thank you for continuing to post them. So there's a question around, I think this is probably for you, George. The CPP is focused around plastic packaging, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. So there's talk about, will there be solutions for plastics in other industries like electronics and textiles? I'm not sure, George, if you have a point of view in sort of plastics beyond just packaging.
Yeah, I think Ben's comments that he just made are actually really relevant here as well. So we started off as a Plastics Pact, really building the coalition to dig into plastics packaging, which is about half of all plastics that are put on the market every year in Canada. That's only part of it. And part of what's on our roadmap is really saying, okay, in the next couple of years, let's start to articulate what is the coalition, or how do we build different coalitions around these other materials so that a long-term vision of a circular economy for all plastics is achievable. But it's probably a different set of organizations. And I think that's one of the really quite amazing things about the Pact, and also the work that the CGF has been doing, is saying, okay, what is, I think Ashley's comment up front was great, which is, what's the stuff that we can best control, and how do we pull as hard as we possibly can on that lever? And in this case, it's design. And so, we've built the pact around this particular part of the problem right now, and we'll definitely be evolving it in the years ahead to tackle other parts of the problem with other organizations and companies that can pull on their levers.
Great. Thank you, George. Really appreciate it. So now we're going to do a quick poll because we'd love to get everyone's engagement and feedback. So I think Isabel will be pulling up the poll now. And the question is, when thinking about advancing a circular economy for packaging, which golden design rules do you see for your organization as top priorities within the Canadian and North American context? And you can select 2. So I guess if you got to pick up your phone, we're allowing everyone to pick up their phone, go to slido.com, hashtag CPP, and then that poll should come up. But don't do anything else on your phone, no emails, just the poll. How's it going, Isabel? I think we should have the waiting music.
So it looks, Nicole, like we have 12 responses that have come through. So we'll give it another few seconds perhaps. And
Okay.
Again, to access the poll, you can either go to slido.com and enter the code for the event that is CPP, or also you can use a QR code that's showing on the screen right now. So if you want to pull your phone's camera and take a picture of that, it should take you to the poll straight away.
Thank you, Isabel. I know there are more than 12 people on the phone, so.
Yes, and we have 40 and counting.
There we go. I think when you provided the appropriate instructions, that probably helped facilitate increased participation. So that one's on me.
And of course, if anyone is having any issues accessing the poll, please feel free to reach out to us in the chat box. We'll be there to assist you. But 65-ish and counting, so we're getting there.
There we go. That's more like it. I guess while we're waiting, we could ask Ben and George if they have any predictions for which the top 2 will be in terms of priorities for Canada. You want to call it? What do you think?
That's a tough one. I think my hunch is PET bottles could be the one that people go for. Feels like a low-hanging fruit here, but let's see.
I'm going to go with the second last one, increase recycling value and flexible.
2, you could pick 2.
And increase recycling value in rigid H2B and PP.
Okay, should we see the results? Okay, so the most important priorities: removing problematic elements from packaging and increasing valuable and flexible. Excellent. So I think the difference between what may be easiest and what may be most important. So I think that's some great feedback from the group. Thank you. So now we're going to move on to our industry panel. We have 3 amazing speakers who are going to talk to us today, and we will have another opportunity for sure for question and answer. We really want to get that broad industry perspective on implementing the GDRs here in Canada. So I'd like to introduce our 3 industry leaders. Again, the bios will go up in the chat as I introduce them. So Vlad Rebellion is the Director of Strategic Initiatives with Loblaw's Company Limited. Johan Hertlein is joining us from Germany today. We're very lucky. And is the Packaging Performance and Sustainability Lead with Nestle Global. And as we heard, is an integral member of the Consumer Goods Forum Coalition for Plastic Action team. Nadine Quinn, who's the Director of Business Development and Procurement at EPS Plastics. So thank you everyone for being with us today. And all of your organizations represent different parts of the plastics value chain. And so to kick things off, we really want to understand, how do you see the golden design rules changing sort of your current and your future thinking on packaging and supply chain decisions. Where do you see the greatest potential for change, but also the greatest challenges? So I think we're going to start by handing the baton over to Vlad. So Vlad, if you could let us know your perspective, that would be great.
Awesome. Thanks, Nicole. And maybe just a quick sound check. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, Vlad, you're coming through. Great. Thank you.
Okay, I was going to say, I don't see any nodding heads, but all good. Awesome. Just give me 1 sec to turn on my camera. There we go. Alrighty, so I'm going to try to keep this to 5 minutes or less, but I'd love to give a bit of a perspective on how we're starting to think about this. So if you can jump to the next slide. As kind of the leading grocery retailer in Canada, we recognize that we have a personal stake in making positive progress in this space. And for us, it really comes down to the simple math, because if we look at our national market share combined with our specific control brand penetration in our stores, we see the direct output of Loblaw Brands specifically as contributing somewhere in the neighborhood of 10% of total plastics packaging that goes into the stream. And so for the overall Loblaw Brands group, this is certainly a top priority in terms of where we're looking to make progress over the next few years. And for us here, the goal really is to ensure that we're simplifying the inputs that go into the stream. And so while we can make an impact on our own, we recognize that's certainly not enough. And so that's where it's really it's great to see that there's so many other perspectives on this call as well, because we see that this is very much a global effort that through the CPP we're executing locally, and ideally we're able to make a great positive impact. And so we've committed publicly to reducing the negative impact of the packaging that we put into the stream. So anywhere that Loblaw controls the packaging that is being used, we want to make sure that it's either recyclable or reusable by 2025. And this is very much a commitment that's been communicated out to our customers and to our supplier base over the past almost year. And so obviously we support the Ellen MacArthur Foundation's vision for a circular plastics economy. We are members of the Consumer Goods Forum. We're also very much active participants in 3 work streams through the Canada Plastics Pact, including the redesigning packaging work stream, the plastics narrative work stream, as well as the data and reporting work streams. So next slide. So with this, we've created a robust action plan that's focused on 4 key pillars. The first one being around reduction. So eliminating any excess packaging on products. And I think the best illustration of this is with our double wrapped cucumber 3-pack. As well as exploring ways that we can remove packaging that doesn't add value to the customer experience. So really thinking more critically about what we're using and why it's being used. Next, through reuse, we're looking to change consumer habits through initiatives like the Loop Initiative and a number of other programs. And our biggest initiative here is really around promoting recyclability as a default for consumers. So we do this by ensuring that our products are compliant to the Golden Design Rules and by eliminating any challenging plastics like black plastics or expanded polystyrenes. And finally, through reframing, we forget that plastics play a major role in shelf life, in transportation, in protection, and in eliminating food waste, and in general, enabling better food safety. And so for us, we recognize that there is a need for plastics, but we need to be using it more effectively and ensuring that customers understand the role that they play along that journey. So how is this coming to life across the private label brands in our business? And I'll just clarify for a second here. I'm representing Loblaw Brands, but there are a number of other plastics work streams across our business, including our apparel group, our enterprise procurement group, and our beauty teams. So if we go to the next slide, this really just helps to illustrate how big of a challenge this is going to be just within the Loblaw Brands portfolio. We maintain a product catalog of more than 10,000 active products, and we introduce over 700 new products every year. And we play effectively in every category in our stores. So while people mostly see us as President's Choice or No Name, we develop products across almost 40 different private label brands spanning the entire format, from fresh meat, produce, to frozen food, to health and beauty, and then of course to household and general merchandise. So I think this slide's a great illustration of how impactful the decisions that we make as a product team directly impact what ends up going into the waste and recycling streams. So we've built a plan to understand what the opportunities for improvement are in every product category and in every packaging type. And we started the hard work of exploring what's actually possible to either improve the materials or enable recyclability where it's not currently present. So next slide. As we think about what this looks like across a broader range of recycling challenges and packaging components, we're focusing on defining what is acceptable and where we can make the most impact. So of course, within kind of guidance of the Golden Design Rules, looking at things like opaque and tinted PET as a big focus for us, recognizing that oftentimes we have these materials because of visual reasons only, not necessarily because there's a functional or a quality or a food safety requirement to it, as well as identifying any areas where black plastic exists, regardless of its resin type or its component size, and being a lot more diligent about moving away from it altogether to really reinforce to our teams, product teams, our vendors, and our customers that black plastic is no longer acceptable within our portfolios. This also includes things like bottle caps and tamper evidence seals, so really in any iteration. We're also looking at the majority of our products. We're finding that not only are there multiple types of things that need to be addressed, for example, ensuring that we're using the right color and resin for the bottle, doing the same for the lid, and doing the same for the label, but then also looking at things more closely like in the adhesives and overall the combination of those different components as they travel through the recycling stream. Then as we look at things like multi-packs, especially in single serve products, we're exploring opportunities for reducing materials. And in the example of juice boxes, also looking at scalable solutions for the plastic straws themselves. And then beyond ensuring that we've converted to currently recyclable options, like in rigid plastics, we're exploring recycled ready solutions in flexibles, given that this is by far and away the most ubiquitous packaging format in our store. So for us, bags are everywhere, either as a primary component or as a part of the finished product. And I'm happy to say that we're pleased with the progress that our suppliers and printers are making here in scaling monomaterial solutions for standard resealable bags, as well as helping us identify alternatives for metallized or foiled bags used in a range of snacking products. As well as we explore solutions for flexibles, we're ensuring that we're maintaining shelf life requirements, obviously for shelf life and food safety, especially in critical categories like fresh products like meat, deli, or dairy. Next slide. So this is really just a glimpse of how we're moving forward towards fully recyclable or reusable future across our portfolio. Obviously, there's still lots to do. We're very much in the infancy of that journey, but we're really encouraged by the progress so far. And so for us, the action plan focuses on three key outcomes. Next slide. First, we're ensuring that we're not continuing to make the problem worse for ourselves. And so we've developed clear training for our product teams. We've updated our product development guardrails to ensure that all new products include these requirements from the start. And so moving forward, packaging and plastics are now at the forefront of how our product development teams approach ongoing innovation. Next, we're working to understand just how much work needs to be done in this space. And this means that we have to dive into the technical data and getting really into the weeds to understand that what defines all of these different materials that are being used, and using this as a clear baseline for tracking our progress along the next several years. And finally, we started to bring our suppliers into the conversation because ultimately they're going to be the ones that drive a lot of this impact. And we're looking to leverage their expertise in sourcing and manufacturing to help us identify and scale out solutions. So this is a big challenge for us, for our vendor community, but we're really happy to see that everyone so far is really rising to the challenge there. Next slide. It's really just in closing, if we step back and think about how we're making an impact, I just want to come back again to that percentage and that scale to really see how we're framing our role in all of this. And it's really about simplifying what goes into the stream, ensuring that we're bringing better quality inputs into circularity to really enable that as a default outcome. And really ensuring that we're being a lot more critical as we think about packaging moving forward. So I talked about this being important to us because of our outsized impact on the outcome. And so for us, being part of the solution is certainly something that we feel privileged to be a part of. So looking forward to the panel today. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Vlad. Really appreciate your insights and Loblaw's perspective. Now I'd like to pass it on to Aideen to talk about her point of view from EFS.
Great, thank you. So yeah, I'm really glad to have the opportunity to talk about the Golden Design Rules today. Really, all of this work is going to have a direct impact on our business. EFS Plastics is a post-consumer plastic recycler. We are a domestic end market for some of these packaging decisions that are made by the brands and manufacturers. So I'll give you a little background about who I am, what EFS does, and then I'm really looking forward to the discussion. So in my undergrad and graduate degrees, I studied biology. I found myself really wanting to directly communicate the need for environmental conservation. And so I started working in recycling education. I worked with Sims in New York City for 5 years, and I got introduced to the world of recycling, and I was hooked. Obviously, management of waste streams, reusing resources, there's just so much happening behind the scenes, and yeah, it's a fascinating space to be working in. I did work at a MRF in Toronto, and through my work there, I was introduced to my current role at EPS Plastics. We are a post-consumer plastic recycler with facilities in Ontario and Pennsylvania, and we're focused on some of the lower value commodities. So the 337 mixed plastic stream is something we do a lot of, and film plastic. Next slide. So EPS Plastics has been operating in Ontario since 2007. We're one of the largest purchasers of 337 in North America. So certainly we buy a lot from Ontario, but we are buying material from Oregon, Texas, Newfoundland. Yeah, we are looking far and wide for more suppliers these days. And we are one of the only purchasers of MRF generated film. So film that's gone through a recycling facility. Typically it's hand sorted out. It's going to be pretty dirty, but that's what we specialize in. And we really focus on continuous improvement. The challenges we had 10 years ago are completely irrelevant to what we're doing today. You saw how much flexible film is out there. That's something we spend a lot of time thinking about. How are we going to adjust our process so that we're able to handle that material in the future? Next slide. So yeah, our facilities in Pennsylvania, Ontario, primarily we're focused on the recycling aspect, but we are vertically integrated to have 2 end markets with it under our umbrella. So we're making a permeable paving solution, and we have a company, Exiplast, that produces custom blow molded HDPE products. Next slide. These are a sample of the materials that we're bringing into our facility. These are the commodity types that we are purchasing, including the film and the mixed rigid plastics. Next slide. Our end product is plastic resin pellets, all 100% PCR. And yeah, HDPE to polypropylene, LDP. Our LDPE is all going into film applications, which is somewhat unique for film recycling. Next slide. Yeah, just a sampling of some of the products. And I did include on the bottom that a lot of our direct customers are converters, but we just happen to know that some of the resin that we're collecting from municipal sources are making its way into some of the brands that are listed below. Next slide. And yeah, this is what I'm looking forward to discussing with all of you in a little bit, but just a few things came to mind from our perspective as a reclaimer in Canada. So the golden design number 2, with the goal of removing problematic elements. Some of the things that are listed there, to me, are only problematic because of the lack of end markets. So for me, for example, black plastic does not necessarily cause a problem for us. Where it causes a problem is that there might be limited options to use a black PCR resin. If there was more demand for black PCR resin, it would not be a problem to bring the black PCR through our process. So just a perspective to throw out there. In 6A, maximizing polyolefin content in film. This was something George spoke about, but yeah, for us, it's very important that that be polyethylene. I know especially in the European context, there's more of the end markets are going into general polyolefin, so a mix of polypropylene and polyolefin. So that can be okay in the European context, but in Canada, in North America, really maximizing polyethylene in the film is very important. And also, I like that right now we're including reference to the APR design guidelines, because those are they're not light reading, but it's very detailed, that it's not simply enough to say 95% is polyethylene, because if 5% of it is nylon, that's going to cause a lot of problems for us. It really does matter the exact formulation. And so some of these formats will have to go through full testing to find out if it's truly recyclable. And then, design rule 8, reducing virgin plastic in the business to business. I mean, I think that's just one of the most important things that we can do as a coalition of organizations trying to move the needle. PCR minimums are crucial. Right now, virgin plastic prices are really high. It feels comfortable for recyclers right now. We can get our price under the price of virgin, but the price of virgin plastic is expected to decline in the next coming months. That's going to create real challenges for recyclers. So it's important for us to set these minimum targets that we all agree on to support the full recycling industry, whether prices are high or when they become low as well. So looking forward to discussing all of this later. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Aideen, for your great perspective. And really, I'm assuming we're going to get a lot of great questions coming in, and we'll get to dig into some of that with you on the panel following our last presenter. So up next, we have Johan from Nestle, who's going to share his perspective on the Golden Design Rules in their organization.
And I will not use slides. I think how complex the topic can be and how much diversity you have in packaging. Vlad showed in his presentation. What I want to do is really, I want to go through a couple of 4 decades and having some key dates which were important in my personal life, and also how the Golden Design Rules fit into this journey. And I want to start in 1986. 1986 was the year when I finished my military service and decided to start studying food technology in Munich. And at that time, in our capital or seat of government in Bonn, industry met with the government and they decided on introducing extended producer responsibility scheme within 5 years. This, I think nobody really realized in the country, but it worked in the background. And the next important date actually was 1991, when this system launched, and I had the first contact with segregated packaging waste. I had also the experience that actually nobody believed that this system will work. It was just, you put it in another bin, but it's going the same way as the household waste goes, and that's it. But 1991 was also the year when Nestle for the first time introduced an environmental sustainability roadmap that included packaging and that included a life cycle assessment linked to packaging choices. This was 7 years before I joined Nestle in 1998. And so I got some projects already, which were basically focusing on optimizing packaging. And they were optimized to better meet the needs of the product we pack, or the product ranges we packed. And they were basically also meant to reduce really the weight of packaging, but also linked to cost saving, very often linked to cost saving, and that was the main focus. And as a packaging engineer, we got tools that helped us to optimize. We got shelf life prediction tools, we got life cycle assessment tools on our desktop so that we could use and evaluate packaging solutions while we developed them. And this became more and more sophisticated over the year, but every year we needed to report on packaging material savings in kilogram or in tons. And this is basically still going on. But what we did in this time, we optimized our portfolio. We did not look really what's happening outside our company. We did not look really at the infrastructure that was being set up mainly here in Europe, linked to the extended producer responsibility schemes that came up. And then basically years passed by, and then around 2015, 2016, there was a new area starting where the stakeholders along the value chain saw the need to go in a pre-competitive collaboration on sustainability topics. And it was mainly by linking the material or the packaging improvements to the need of improving the infrastructure. And initiatives like the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, which was basically the platform for the industry to meet at that time, gave really the platform to have discussions which went far beyond. And everyone realized that the complexity that Vlad showed in his presentation, and we all know from our portfolios, needed to be streamlined in a way that if you really want to have efficient waste management, you cannot continue having the complexity with respect to material choices, with respect to design and material combinations that either were hard to recycle or not to recycle at all. And this was a time when basically we had this collaboration in EMF, Ellen MacArthur Foundation, the Consumer Good Forum, in Europe, CFlex, Circular Economy for Flexible Packaging was formed, and later, since 2 years roughly, we have this Forever Green initiative that is talking about how to recycle paper-based packaging materials. So to make sure that beside the material, we have also the infrastructure component in our mind, and when we plan that it is something that the packaging will meet the requirements of a circular economy infrastructure. And now I think the next important day in 2025, when we all, or a lot of companies have signed up to meet the global commitment that all packaging is recyclable or reusable or compostable. This is roughly 40 years. It's 39 years since I had the first contact with the topic. And what is really important is that these design rules that help us to really plan and optimize our packaging according to the infrastructure that is there, but also indicating that we need to reduce the complexity is a super tool. And coming from Germany, I think we probably started earlier. We have design guides since maybe 20, 25 years for our system. But the golden rules we find here for me is really that it's the first time I see that we cover different regions of the world in one document. And this is super helpful, and it will really help us. And internally in Nestle, we have our own golden design rules. We call it Rules of Sustainable Packaging. And you can download them from our internet site page. There is an external version existing. And it's basically, you will see that the golden rules we developed with the Consumer Good Forum very much fit into this approach. And I think that's where really I see this huge benefit of having this collaboration along with the retailers, with our competitors on these golden design rules.
Thank you so much, Johan. Really appreciate your insights and your extensive experience in the industry. Really pleased to have you here with us today. So we only have about 10 minutes for questions. So I just wanted to reiterate, this is very much the beginning of the conversation about the golden design rules in Canada. There'll be a number of different forums and ways in which we can continue to engage. And we'd love to continue to get people's input and thoughts as we work through it. So to the panel, there are actually a few questions around flexible, which I think makes sense given when we did our poll, that was the #1 item that the group identified was the highest priority. So I think there's two pieces. One is around communicating with suppliers. So how are you guys approaching communicating, the idea of wanting to move to monomaterial, eliminating problematic elements? How are people talking to multi-layer film suppliers to sort of get them on board and on side with these rules, and how's that been going? Vlad or Johan want to jump in?
I can go first. Really, the way that we've been approaching it so far has been very much let's have one-on-one conversations, given that up until recently, the GDRs were still very much in development. And so a lot of that was around introducing our suppliers to what we're actually trying to solve for, getting them comfortable with this is how we've landed on a definition. Now, what of this is something that either already exists or is already kind of in the works from your perspective? And so really it's been around grounding ourselves in what's possible and how much of this can already start to be implemented, with the understanding that, you know, some of our suppliers are going to now start asking for those solutions as well. And so if we can address that both from the perspective of their own supply chain through packaging suppliers, as well as our own food manufacturers, ideally kind of landing at something in the middle. It's obviously a really challenging thing to solve for, given that flexibles are used in so many different ways. And so, you know, the specific technical requirements across different categories are going to vary wildly. And so I think for us, at least for the time being, it's really focused on what is the narrow part of the funnel that can drive the most impact. And so what are those few components that are used the most, whether it's in high volume categories or whether it's in the categories that we know solving it here means the solution can trickle down into other ones. Yeah, I'll kind of leave it at that for now.
Cool. I'll just chime in that I think it's so important right now that brands be having these discussions proactively. And it's a tough thing to do right now because in some situations, if you're making a stand-up pouch, for example, you're not yet able to change your public messaging on it. So you might go through the full effort. You might be willing to pay more of making a pouch that is technically recyclable, but it's not yet something we can put out to the public because too much of the market is still multi-material when it comes to a stand-up pouch. So I just want to say that this is material that as a film recycler, we are receiving today. And it is important that you make the change as soon as possible, because if it's not a mono material, it's adding contamination to our process. And contamination in our process, when we're talking about multi-material, is not just that it gets rejected, it actually degrades the quality of the products we're making. So just want to encourage you all to keep pushing, keep asking those questions. It's going to take a long time to get recognition for it, but it really does make an impact for us.
Thank you, Aideen, really appreciate that. And I think we probably have time for one or two more. There was a question around measurement. So as companies adopt the Golden Design Rules, how will their progress or adoption of those be measured? I'm not sure if that's something, George, you could speak to.
Hello. So yeah, very briefly on this. One of the things that we are doing is building a framework that companies, both within the CPP and outside, can commit to and then report on. So how is this program around the GDRs going in your company? The other thing that we're doing within the CPP is really building a fairly broad set of activities on monitoring what's happening within the recycling system and the way that plastics are managed in Canada. And so what we'll be doing is on a yearly basis, really taking a look at what are the flows and importantly, how are they changing? And we know that that's an important step. We also know that we need to get to a place where we're able to get a little bit better real-time monitoring and feedback, maybe not quite real-time, but a little bit better, shorter time horizon monitoring and feedback back to brands to say, okay, listen, this is having an impact. This is not having an impact in the way that we wanted. Let's think about where do we go next to the broader point that Ben made, that these are not written in stone. There's an opportunity to continue to tweak these over time, but we need the information to be able to do so. So we're definitely sort of building some efforts around making sure that that information is available.
Thank you, George. Really appreciate it. And I think one last question, and it could be George or Ben or anyone from the panel. There's a question about compostables. So what role does compostables play into the Golden Design Rules? The focus seems to be largely recyclability and reusability. So I don't know if you guys can address that.
I'm curious what Jochen has to say about that and where those conversations were when about compostables at the global level. Jochen, I think you're muted.
So in the context, I think, of the Golden Design Rules, it was not discussed in detail. It was, of course, discussed when we had some of the rules being set up, but we never went into the details. So it's probably either something to follow, or yeah, probably yes. But how you want to handle it in Canada, of course, George, you probably know better than me.
My brief answer to this, because I'm conscious of time, is this is a very live discussion in Canada. To start engaging in this good discussion, I point everyone to a phenomenal report done by EEQ, and they released this past summer. You'll find it on their website or Google it. And it really, I would say, lays out the issue in a really good way about how do we understand compostables in the market today within, mainly they looked at it from a Quebec context, but I think it's largely broadly applicable to Canada. And I think that provides the initial fodder for thinking about what some really good paths forward and a bit of a consensus in this country can be on where and how to use compostable plastics.
Great, thank you. We're going to try to squeeze one more in because there's so many great ones coming in. We don't want to leave as many unanswered as possible. For Ben and panel, were there any standardization efforts discussed at the CGF level in terms of colors of PET bottles and trays, or any other ways to have more standardization within or across industries? That would, of course, be within competition guidelines.
Hi, Nicole, this is Ben. Faceless now, I think my video switched off, but I'll pick that question up because I think there's a really exciting point here. I don't want people to miss this. In the rules that we put forward on both on PET bottles, also PET thermoforms, there's some commitments there about color and standardization of colors, which is a huge step that's being made, and a really exciting step, I think, to really demonstrate that when you get companies together, they can really take some big steps here. Yeah, I think many of us thought the issue of colored PET bottles would be one we might never crack, but we really managed to get some beverage companies together to say, we're willing to take that step. And so if you look at the guidelines, they say that there's a standardization of preferred transparent, and light blue and light green below a certain L value is also okay, but really making a standardization away from many different colors and even opaque PET. So I think those of you that are interested, have a good look at these, because you'll see other attempts at standardization, and I think really exciting to see what we could achieve when we got these companies together. Thanks, Nicole.
Great, thanks, Ben. So thank you again, everyone, for your great questions. We really appreciate them, and we're sorry we couldn't address all of them, but I think we got a good chunk. I just want, again, a huge thank you to all of our speakers and panelists today: Ashley, Ben, Vlad, Aideen, Johan, George. Thank you, everyone, for participating and sharing your insights and your expertise. I think it led to a really rich and engaging discussion, and thank you all for your great questions. So now I'm going to hand it over to George. Before that, just wanted to say we look forward to continuing the conversation with everyone on how to advance the GDRs in Canada. And we actually have one opportunity where we're going to do just that. So George is going to chat to you about a great educational opportunity to really entrench GDRs in the Canadian context.
Well, I get the opportunity to introduce Jim Downham, who's the CEO, am I getting that right, or Executive Director of Packaging Consortium. And he's going to talk a little bit about the program that we're putting together to go deeper on these. And I think that that's one part of really taking this conversation today, and we're really committed to, over the coming months and into 2022, building a really robust program around these. And Jim's going to talk a bit about what's coming next on that. So over to you, Jim.
George, thanks so much. It's a pleasure to be here with everybody today. And I just wanted to recap really quickly what I thought were some of the really critical comments that were made today. Listening to Ashley, we control the design. That's so true. I love that. The other one that we keep hearing about is move with speed. So I can assure you that George and David Hughes and the Canada Plastics Pact are moving at the speed of sound very quickly. So these are important messages that, to me, you should be taking away today. We're Canadian pioneers. We have an opportunity here to lead the discussion, and I think we're doing that. And, as Ben Dixon said, this is driven at a global level by the Consumer Goods Forum. And, this is galvanizing people globally. So this is not just, we're not just creating this locally. This is driven from the top down, and we're very, very excited about that. Just a couple of other things. George and the team haven't been, for those of you that are not involved, haven't been bragging about the hard work that's been going on under his leadership for the last, my goodness, 9 months now. And I have the privilege of working with Vlad and George, and Dan Lance is a key member and of the Redesigning Packaging Working Group, and brilliant group of people that have been heavily engaged. And it's from there that we're continuing to work and accept the Golden Design Rules into the Canadian community. And the thing that's also really important is this Canadian guidance document that George has touched on. So I just wanted to refer to that. 2025 is the date, so speed is of essence. And I love what Johan said about this is a super tool, and which is really, really cool. And congratulations, Johan, for hanging in there for 39 years, my friend. So if we could go to the next slide, please. Really, we've been working closely with PAC, is heavily involved with George and the team, and we've collaborated formally to offer a virtual course this year. So these are activities that you can engage in right away. One is a virtual course. I'm going to just give you the date in a minute. Another is going to be an in-class, and it's going to be actually at the PACX Toronto show. So these are going to help you to embed the GDRs into your business. And of course, we've already talked about the key objective of reducing the complexity of the recycling process while increasing recovery recycling rates. So next slide, please. First date coming up is October the 13th. That'll be a virtual course. You can register already. Registration's open on the PAC site. And for CPP and PAC members, there's no charge for this. And on November the 10th, we're actually going to have an in-person workshop at the PACX trade show. And that'll be a lot of fun. And again, that'll be free for PAC and CPP members. Our course instructor, fortunately, we have an individual that was involved in the development of the Golden Rules. I think the only one that represented Canada, Dan Lance, and most of you know Dan, he's our PACnext director and wears a bunch of other hats, brilliant guy. Next slide, please. And then the other thing that we want you to know about is there's the PACX Toronto packaging show runs from 9th to 11th. And we have a significant booth there. We've had it there. In fact, it was PAC that founded this show in 1950, the original show. And we've asked George and the CPP to come in to our booth, and we're going to put on a really cool museum of award-winning sustainable packaging innovations, inclusive and accessible packaging design, and the world's best package brand marketing. And George hopefully will be there, and the team will be there. And we know that the team will be there throughout the show as well. So please come by and see us, and we'd love to have you to come to the live event on the 10th. So next slide, please. We're also working with George on developing something very, very specific. So these are high-level conversations, but each one of you individually may need to take a deeper dive into your organizations. I'm sure you will. I mean, when you see the complexity of what Vlad and the retailers are dealing with, I mean, it's massive. So Alan Blake, I think you know, many of you, PACnext US director based out of Las Vegas, and Dan, of course, and Andrew McDonald works on our team here as well, and all very, very bright, talented people, and they're ready to help you and get these golden design rules embedded into your organizations. We don't yet have dates set for 2022, but it's an evolving program, and I really appreciate being here today to talk with everybody, and good luck getting these rules embedded in your organization. Thank you so much, Nicole.
Thanks, Jim. I really appreciate you sharing those great opportunities, and I encourage everyone to avail themselves of all of the great courses and tools and services I think we can all use all the assistance we can get in implementing these within our organizations. I know mine, like many of yours, many people touch packaging from different parts of the organization, and it's a huge educational job we have to do to explain what the GDSRs are, what they mean, why they're important, and why everyone in the organization needs to be thinking of them as they're making packaging decisions. So thank you, Jim, for all of those resources. George, over to you to close us out.
Just a couple of quick remarks saying that really, first of all, a big thank you to Nicole for hosting us and doing such a great job of moderating and bringing this together. Thanks to all the speakers who shared their wisdom and insights quite openly, and the huge lift in efforts that many people have made to bringing these golden design rules into a Canadian context. Stay tuned for watching out for more resources on these in the years and in also the weeks ahead. And I'll just point out, if you are interested in digging into more really great content on the circular economy for plastics in Canada, we are co-hosting a session along with the Chemistry Industry Association of Canada and the Circular Plastics Task Force in a couple weeks' time on September 24th. And you can register using that link there. And it's going to be presenting some results from their really great phase 1 of research on understanding some of the barriers on creating a circular economy for plastics packaging. I think that's the last slide. And if so, oh yeah, one last thing. We are going to send a post-event survey. We really appreciate your feedback so we can continue to improve these sessions in the weeks ahead. And I think with that, thank you all for spending your very valuable time this afternoon. Bye for now.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.